Welcome back to Why Blank Lost for Survivor 45. I'm David Bloomberg, and with me, as always, is my co-host Jessica Lewis. Jessica.
I'm sorry. What? What? I was. Wait.
We
What?
started the podcast. You were supposed to be keeping watch for when it began recording.
Oh,
Yeah,
I was.
keep it.
I was. I was looking for coconuts. I was busy. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
There was lots of coconuts over here with my dog.
Yes, you two need lessons on how to keep watch, just like Austin and Drew do. But it's
Listen,
okay.
It
It's
was so
okay.
much fun, though.
It's okay. I found the hammer clue. So you know what that means. Stop.
We're gonna break some
Hammer
rocks.
time.
Oh, I want to break rocks. That's what I want to do. See, that's what I needed. I needed a hammer.
Oh,
Take
that's
out
right.
Some rocks.
You could have broken. You could have gotten your revenge. Austin got revenge for you. I hadn't even thought about this.
Well, listen, there's a lot of rocks that need to be broken with that hammer. So that whole thing was hysterical because, like, that pile was that like I'm trying to remember if like that pile of like rotten coconuts was really like where they were supposed to be looking, or did they just assume that that's the area that it would be in?
I don't know, because they knew that it was the palm tree X, and so they were digging all over that area.
It just seemed like a whole lot of rotten coconuts. So like if you're looking for coconuts, that is not where you want to look for coconuts. So I don't think your cover story is very good.
Well,
because that pile of coconuts is rather gross.
That's why they were looking. I mean, your cover story also needs some work if you just walk off in the opposite direction when you're busted. You know.
Well, and that's true too. Yeah, when you're like, oh. Yeah. Very entertaining. That entire segment was definitely fun. But I will say, though, I appreciate the moment because that could have gone really south, right? Because you had two people who were clearly involved in something nefarious. Then you had two people who were busting them, being involved in something nefarious. And instead of it blowing up and becoming a big issue, they all came together and were like, okay, the four of us are now going to work together to find this.
Those four were already working together. I mean,
I know they were,
but yeah.
Right. But the women could have said, we found the rope. Now we found this hammer. We're not going to tell them. But instead they were like, hey, look what we got. Austin, this is yours. Ta-da. And it was just, I thought it was really nice that like they didn't let that get in the way of things for them. So that was a nice moment. I did really appreciate that because I was worried that like all of a sudden, like, oh, snap. Now everything's going to be like, you know, me for myself kind of thing. Like we found it. We're not going to tell them. But they didn't do that.
Yeah, especially since the women were already suspicious.
Right.
Of the guys. And then, you know, I mean, eventually Drew recovered and was like, Sifu's fault. Blame Sifu, you know, and, you know, which.
But playing air guitar and doing poses.
Well, it wasn't even air guitar. I mean, when
it was air machete, maybe?
Yeah, it was machete guitar. I mean, I've heard of calling a guitar an axe. I've never heard of using an actual machete, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, so now all four of them share the idol secret. In addition to everyone in the tribe knowing about safety without power, plus everyone that's left on Lulu knowing about it because Drew told Caleb. I know this worked out for Drew multiple times now, but I just don't think this kind of openness can continue.
Well, it is interesting because with such small tribes too, like you only have 6 people on your tribe and 4 of them are all involved in the secret. So it's like these 2 people that are like on the outs. It is very interesting to see how quickly
just sitting there being watched, just sitting at their tribe being watched, you know, to make sure they don't do anything.
I don't love the small tribes. I really don't. I want a 10-person tribe again because I feel like with a larger group, so many more fun like things like backstabby kind of things can happen. When you have such a small group, it just loses that luster.
I don't know. We had some pretty fun backstabby things here, and I mean, we'll obviously be getting to that soon,
Mm-hmm.
because we'll be talking about Sabiyah, who was not among the group that found the hammer, or the idol, but this is her podcast, unfortunately for her. And so
Mm-hmm.
we will look at her game as we do every week, comparing it to my rules for winning that I originally wrote way back after season 1 and have been updating ever since. Using all the non spoiler information available to us from what we saw on TV, interviews, social media, which we have some, and secret scenes, which we actually have one that was pertinent here. The newest version of the rules can be found on the website by going to our dedicated page at robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed, which is now working again, and
Lovely.
clicking on the link bubble for the Survivor rules. Now, before we get to the discussion of Sabiyah and the rules, we always have some other things to discuss. One of them,
We do.
we already discussed one. So I want to lead off this segment
with when I was right.
No, I'm not aware of that. But when I was just reiterating what I said last week about really appreciating the 90-minute length of the show and what they're doing with it. And, while I wasn't happy at all to see Sabiyah go, overall, this was an amazing episode of television.
Yes, and I will agree with that again, that the way that they are balancing things out, I do feel like we're learning so much more about each group. We aren't limited in scope like we used to be, where it was like, oh, this is the tribe that won versus this is the tribe that lost. And so all of our energy are going to be into the tribe that lost because that's where it matters.
Right.
And I think that it's really nice to have that balance where we are seeing bits and pieces of each group, whether or not they're going to be going to tribal council. So I really do appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I was right. We should focus on that too, that I was right about.
I don't know what you're talking about, but
would you like me to remind you?
You well, you can remind me as I suspect we're about to get there. But
so nice.
Because this is a podcast about rules, the first specific thing I want to discuss is how I see the game rules when it comes to the goodwill advantage and the new idols. Now, we'll talk more about our opinions of the idol later, but questions immediately came up on social media asking, can the goodwill advantage be used to cover the vote a player has to sacrifice to extend the idol? By my reading and interpretation, the answer is, or at least should be, a clear no. The goodwill advantage says it allows the player to, quote, restore one lost vote, and that it, quote, reinstates your ability to vote at your next tribal council. Okay. Meanwhile, a player has to sacrifice their vote to extend the life of an idol, and the idol paper specifically says you must be able to vote to sacrifice. If for any reason you lose your ability to vote, you cannot sacrifice. So even before looking very closely, the words losing and sacrificing are two very different things. The first is a penalty. The second is a choice. I mean, you're a lawyer. I wrote and interpreted regulations and laws for over 30 years. We know the importance of using specific or different words.
Oh, yes. Words matter.
Yes. Commas matter. Words matter. Commas
matter, definitely. Yes.
And the language within that idol paperwork seems to reinforce my thoughts that losing and sacrificing are two different things, so you cannot use the advantage to offset the idol.
And that makes sense because I do think sacrifice is a term that means something, like you are giving something up, you are sacrificing something. So it does seem like there's more of a choice involved there as opposed to too bad, so sad, you've lost, and that's it. So I would agree with that sentiment. Yes.
Yeah. Now,
but I also do think, I'm sorry, I just want to jump in here too, where like this is something we've talked about before, and these things shouldn't be up for interpretation. And that's the other problem with a lot of these types of idols and advantages that are being created. And we've talked about this a lot, where people should not be reading it and interpreting it differently, because then you are potentially affecting the game just by the introduction of this particular item and the way that the words are written on a piece of paper. So I don't love that they are not clear. I think it should be much more clear.
I mean, maybe their version of being clear was using two different words. Now, I mean, am I saying that without a doubt the producers won't let it happen? No, because we've discussed it here before that they've made the wrong call in the past because they don't have this kind of experience with the need to use the right terminology.
Right.
I would hope that since they're putting both of these in the game at the same time, it wasn't like they put one in and then a couple seasons they put another in and they were like, oh, we didn't think about how these would interact. They're putting them both in the same season, same time.
Yeah.
I would hope that they already thought this through and came to the same conclusion, which is why they called one lose and one sacrifice.
Well, you would hope, but we've seen this in years past where they've introduced something and it hasn't been played correctly per the language, and you've even had players having to call people out and explain it that no, hold up, that's not what it says something different. So I do think that there is some contradictory things that are happening and have happened in years past with introductions of new things like this. And so I don't know if they necessarily go through all of the steps to compare and contrast, like, well, how is this going to affect this, as opposed to just going, oh, here's an idea, like, let's do this. And, and I think that there is a certain part of the introduction of these things and the bit of confusion they do create that production probably likes, because there is this idea that, well, the players are going to have to figure it out. And we know that they enjoy making people have to like figure things out. We've seen this with challenges and puzzles and all of these things. But also I think it gives them an opportunity to kind of see how the players are going to play with this particular thing. And, so maybe they want some ambiguity and they want a little bit of confusion, because if it's used in a particular way that they weren't expecting, but they like the way it turned out, well, then they'll be like, oh, look at us. We can pat ourselves on the back because we introduced it and this is how the player played it.
Yeah, I just, that grinds my gears just thinking about it. I mean, you mentioned other things to consider. One is if sacrifice and lose are equivalent, it would mean basically someone could use the goodwill advantage to play their shot in the dark and also to vote.
Oh, sure.
Which I do not see happening. I do not see them allowing that.
Well, but here's the problem. How do they stop them from doing it?
Because you give up your vote. You don't lose your vote. You give up or sacrifice your vote for the shot in the dark.
Sure, but I'm saying, like, in that moment when a player is like, I'm going to do this, it's and can we lead this into what Sabiyah did? Because
yes, it does lead into it. But I just want to say this is why in all my time working, there were always people who would be like, and these were people who worked for the same agency I did, who would be like, these regulations are too complicated. You should just make them simpler. And it's like, you can't, because I mean, that's great in theory. That sounds just absolutely great. And as soon as you try to simplify it, you create loopholes.
Well, but there are lawyers out there. They're creating their own loopholes by making them confusing.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying, is by not, I mean, in a true law or regulation, you define all your terms. You would have lose defined. You would have sacrifice defined. You would have all these terms defined so that you don't have a situation like this. Yeah. And I think I told this story once before, or maybe I told it on the Big Brother podcast. I can't remember. There was a situation where a lawyer tried to say this rule applies because although the process isn't specifically defined, it uses the same type of screw system to make the material go out.
I'm sorry.
And so they wanted to apply a different rule. What they didn't know was I was very familiar with those manufacturing techniques from college. And so I was like, no, those are completely different. You can call it whatever you want, but those are completely different. And so they lost. Now, the but again, this is the problem. They tried to find a loophole, and it was literally only because I was involved that it got stopped. And it's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same sort of situation. You cannot make things too simple. And so,
well, but you also can't make them too complicated. That's my point, is that too simple is one thing, but too complicated is another.
Right, too complicated is another. But define your terms or something.
Right.
Right. And I don't want it more complicated. I just want it clear. That's
I think that's the best term to use, is clear. There needs to be no ambiguity. And so if you are choosing your words, it needs to be no ambiguity, which is why, I don't know, regular old idols were great, right? Because there was no ambiguity. Everybody knew how they worked and everybody knew what they did, and there was no question, and there was no mathematical calculation that you had to figure out as you were standing there going, okay, wait, if I do this and then this happens, but then that happens over here and then this happens over there, which I can appreciate the concept that they want to change the game and they want to make it more interesting. But at the same time, this is what's happening, is you are creating those potential issues where players are confused. They don't know what they can and can't do. And you could run the risk of negatively affecting the game just because of the words on a piece of paper.
I mean, if they had only introduced the idol, it would have been fine. It was the introduction of the goodwill advantage that confuses things now.
Yeah.
If, Jeff only tooketh away, it would be fine, but Jeff giveth too. So
he wants to do both.
Yes. Now, this does lead into the next area where producers did something I did not think they would. Because last week, I said I didn't think the rules would allow Sabiyah to melt her candle in the tribal council fire. Turns out she very much could and did. And Jeff.
And I do believe that I said she should be able to do it.
I don't remember that.
I'm cheers to myself for doing this because I was right.
Oh, see, I've got fire is your life, because fire could have been her life, but which we'll discuss that part later. But so Jeff confirmed in interviews and on his podcast that they did not consider the possibility of someone finding the idol and still not having fire for so long, which is something that I had said last time. But see, here's where my mistake was. Presuming there were rules in place to address this sort of thing about what people could and couldn't do with the tribal council fire, because as we just discussed, if it were me, if I were involved in this show, I would have created rules for this sort of thing. I would have looked at it and said, something could happen here.
Yes.
We need to create a rule. But they don't have someone like me on staff. Now, just one moment here. Production, if you are listening, I am currently available for hire. I just want to put that out there. But in the meantime, Jeff acknowledged that when Sabiyah dropped the idol in the fire, he had to quickly consider whether or not it was fair, given that there were no specific rules against it. He told Dalton Russ, all the note says is you've got to burn the wax. So without a specific prohibition, and without a more general rule like I thought there would be, yes, he was right to let her continue, not to mention that it made for great TV.
Well, and this is the thing that I will say, as far as like rules are concerned, there are a whole host of rules that come with being on Survivor. And I've spoken to this previously, that even like the rock draw is like a whole section in your contract that you have to like read and agree to. So there are certainly things that are included that you are agreeing to. And so I do think that it's interesting that with all of these new introduction of things, if they are going to include additional components to what you are agreeing to relative to your game. However, I will say this, that I don't recall there being any indication as to being allowed to like stand up during tribal council and move around, but production made you feel as if you could not stand up and move around. And so there are
suddenly people could. Yes.
Right. So there are some like unwritten rules that you just kind of agree to because you're like, well, this just feels like what I'm supposed to
Right.
do. And this just seems like what I'm supposed to do. But when you are creating these new types of advantages and idols that come with all of these structures, and you are not spelling out what you can't do, then you are allowing the players to interpret, because
Right.
now you have this piece of paper that's got, it's this big and has all of these instructions on it. And Sabiyah's looking at hers going, well, there's nothing on here that says I can't use the fire at tribal council,
Right.
because everything else has been so like spelled out, which you can and can't do, and you're going to lose your idol, or you're going to lose your vote, or you're going to do this and sacrifice, blah blah blah. So again, this is an effect of them doing this and introducing these types of advantages and idols, is that if you don't spell it out, well, then guess what? People are going to interpret it.
Right. And that's certainly something I encountered in my work life, where someone would come to me and say, hey, so this rule has been on the books for 40 years. And, a company just came to me and said they want to do this, which doesn't seem right, but it's not prohibited by the rule. And I'd be like,
right.
Oh, well,
Right.
if it's not prohibited, they can do it. We may
Right.
not like it. We may now move forward and change the rule. But until that time, they're not doing anything wrong. They found a creative way around it, which is, why you have to write these, more complicated rules, or at least clearer rules. And you have to account for different things. Like, for example, totally different example. I remember back in the day when I was in college, so a long time ago, CDs were just coming out, but I could only get international versions of Queen CDs, because the contract that Queen had signed for American distribution only included like LPs and tapes, because CDs didn't exist yet.
People aren't going to know what tapes are when you say
that. Well, yeah. So they may not know what CDs are. But so they had to negotiate a new contract for distribution of CDs, because there was nothing in there about and all future media that may come out. And apparently, I guess most contracts, most bands must have had that, or they quickly moved to do it. But for Queen, for the longest time, you could only get international versions of their CDs for that reason, because it wasn't included in their contract. And so
it's fascinating.
Yeah.
As I sit here, I'm thinking about something else that happened before I went out to play the game. And it was in regards to clothing, because we were sent an entire list of the clothing that we needed to send in to CBS so they could go through our clothes, right? And so it was broken down into sections, and it was game outfit and juror outfits, and so it had all these categories. And I'm looking at the game outfit. Oh, it also had press outfits. And I'm looking at the category of game outfit, and the only thing that was listed in my game outfit was a swimsuit and sneakers and like socks. And I was like, hold the phone. That doesn't make any sense, because I've watched the show long enough to know that people wear clothes when they're actually playing. Yes. So I ended up contacting my casting person and saying, question, are you picking my game clothes from my press outfits? And she was like, oh, thank God you figured that out. And it was like one of those things where like, they don't tell you that, but because I figured it out, then she was like, okay, now we can talk about what you want to wear on the show. But like, so there's another little example of how these types of things happen in the show. It's like, they don't want to tell you this information, but if you figure it out, then they might be like, okay, all right, now you figured that out. And so it's a very similar kind of thing that I think is happening in the game, where it's like the producers are not going to tell you certain things you can and can't do, but if you figure something out, they might be like, okay, that's good, you figured it out, and that's fine. So I do think that it creates an interesting environment for both production and the players, because they're interacting in a way that they probably shouldn't be, but it can help the show. It can help make things more interesting. And so I do think that there is some good there by letting them interpret, but at the same time, the ambiguity of it should not exist.
Yeah, I mean, the clothes thing that you were talking about is how we ended up with someone like Lil in a scout costume the whole time. Because
Right.
she thought, they told them that they were just going to do press. And someone on
Mm-hmm.
that season or a different season was in like a multi-$1,000 suit,
Yes.
and it's like, guess what?
Yeah.
You're that suit isn't going to be
That's
worth a
what
whole
you're
lot
stuck in now.
anymore.
And this is
Yeah.
why I was like, hold up.
Yeah.
Where's my clothes coming from?
Yeah.
So I do think that it's always worth asking. And if
Mhm.
production will tell you, great, then let them. But if they don't tell you, then but it's certainly worth the ask. I do think that people who are playing this game should have the ability to say, hey, I'm seeking some clarification
Mhm.
on this. I would like to know what it is I'm doing with this.
Yeah, well, they don't even give them bathing suits anymore, so you don't have to worry about that part. But
I know.
but I mean, the thing is, as you said, if they don't learn from this and add some rules about the fire at tribal council, what it can and can't be used for, this really opens up future possibilities. So Mike Bloom tweeted, "Why did Lulu not catch fish with their fishing gear and use the fire at tribal council to roast it?"
Mm-hmm.
And now he was
Yep.
kidding, but this is exactly what I'm talking about for the future.
Right.
Rob and Steven also discussed it on Know It Alls. What's to stop a tribe on Survivor 47 from doing exactly that? Like,
Or
why
just
can't
taking some fire, bringing it back with them.
that's what I was going to say? Take a
Yeah.
big, thick branch, light it up on the tribal council, and carry it back if they don't have flint.
Mm-hmm.
Production needs to think through these implications. Now, they may going forward, but I mean, again, even though I just gave away a bunch of info for free, I'm still available for hire. And anyone who's listening to this right now and is going to be on like Survivor 47 or 48, you better try it. I want to see you try it.
I think they should.
Unless productions, or Jeff is like, no, then,
Yeah.
I mean, but it can't hurt to try.
No, it can't hurt to try. It's very Adam Klein-esque, right? When he was like, I think the podium is an idol.
Yes.
You gotta try.
Right. Yeah. Now, speaking of idols, once the Reba, well, sort of, once the Reba foursome found the idol, something very unexpected happened. Jessica Lewis tweeted that she kind of liked the idol twist.
I did, didn't I?
I was shocked. I thought we were in the Big Brother 25 Scrambleverse. You may not even know what that means, but some people here will.
I know. I responded with my own shock that I was like, this is a little bit crazy, that I kind of liked it. Mm-hmm. And I say I kind of liked it because I like the fact that there is some work that can go into this, and there are decisions that need to be made. But again, we just talked about all of the clarification that might not exist with some of the verbiage that is being used. But I do appreciate the fact that there's a little more to this than just the regular old. And I know. It doesn't make any sense. But I was like, I kind of like this. It's a little okay.
Yeah, I agree. It's an interesting twist on things. There could be up to 3 idols in the game, though we only know of 2 being found. And of course, one's already gone. But nobody will know how long each of those idols is good for.
Right.
And I think giving a choice is much better than just dropping things on people.
Yes, and that's what I think is interesting. It's this idea of, and maybe I was a little reminiscent of the legacy advantage that I had found, where it was mine until I couldn't use it until like day 36 or something. And I was like, okay, well then I'm just going to keep it till day 36, which was infuriating production because they were like, we want you to do something with it. We want you to like barter it and like trade it. And I'm like, no, it's mine, And so like, I can appreciate that idea where it's like, well, I've got some options here. Like, do I want to try to, and so I feel like maybe they're forcing players' hand a little bit to like, all right, we need to make it more clear that we want them to barter, as opposed to just like, Jessica, don't you see all these lines on the back of the envelope? You know what that means? That means everybody you're supposed to pass this to. And I'm like, I don't care. So it's like, so I think maybe
not a freaking library book. I'm keeping it.
Exactly. Like, it's mine and I'm keeping it until I can't keep it anymore. And so I feel like maybe that's what production's idea was. That was like, we want to make players feel that like there's something I could do with this if I want to. And then this is how it's going to play out. So I did appreciate that idea of it, that there are options available and it can change how this structure looks with this particular idol.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So to follow up on my surprise, I thought that, that took me to the Scrambleverse. But what surprised me even more had nothing to do with idols. It was that at the beginning of this episode, Kendra decided she isn't afraid of the lawyer anymore. And I mean, I think it's...
Thank you, Kendra.
Yeah, I think it's mainly because she had a kind of a cliche idea about him, and that didn't change until she talked to him in more depth. If they had gone to tribal council earlier, I think your winner pick could have been in trouble. And
but they didn't. And so my winner pick is killing it.
Yeah. And, and this is what we talk about in terms of first impressions. He said he was a lawyer. Ooh, scary. But getting to know him, as Katura said, he's a baby lawyer. He's like a lion cub, I think. He's cute and cuddly and not yet mean and scary with big sharp teeth.
I know. We're so scary. Yeah. I did appreciate, she was like, he's a new lawyer. He wants to tell everybody he's a lawyer.
Yeah.
Like, he just passed the bar. Like, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting. Although, the salesman seems to be doing much better than the lawyers.
But everybody know he's a salesman.
I know, but so now salesmen maybe need to be the group that scares everyone who plays Survivor, because that's been a group that's been discussed, right?
Yep. Yeah, just never. So, if you're selling law books, just never mention what you do at all. Just forget it. All right.
Pretend to be a lawyer.
You're a salesman, pretend to be a lawyer.
Right, exactly. Like, no,
I'm a new lawyer. Really. I'm a new lawyer. I haven't started
I'm a baby
yet.
lawyer.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, is there anything else you wanted to discuss before we move on?
No, I think we're 32 minutes in. We should probably get going.
I realized that. I was like, dang. I mean, we talked a lot about rules, just not the rules that apply to Sabiyah.
Right.
Well, some of the rules that apply, not the same. Anyway, so normally right now we would do our Jeff Probst is wrong about blank segment, but we're going to hold on to that until Rule 7, because the topic that I say he's wrong about deals with things that we're going to discuss. So it wouldn't make sense to say he's wrong till I explain why I think he's wrong.
Okay.
So I, of course, have a few other thoughts, but I have or will put those in TikTok so people can check those out at the...
Of course you will.
TV. Yes. But before we see how Sabiyah did, we do need to mention that the rules we will be discussing come in a shorter and much more colorful version in poster form. Go to robhaswebsite.com/yxlostfeed, scroll down to the poster, click on it, and order it. Then you can keep scrolling and go to the t-shirt, and you can click on it and order that too. And then you can keep scrolling. And look, there's a different t-shirt. It's the checklist t-shirt. You can click on that and order it too. Or you can order it through the same clicking of the first t-shirt, because they're on the same website. But you know what I mean. And so, yes, just go there, click, order everything. robhaswebsite.com/yxlostfeed.
Yes, order everything. It's all good.
Sabiyah put herself in a good position within a bad tribe from the start. She had close relationships and or alliances with just about everyone, and she worked to figure out her best path to the end. But did she worry about the future too much, or did she not think about it enough? Or could it somehow have been both? It's time to figure out why Sabiyah lost. We begin with the first and most important rule, which is to scheme and plot. Sabiyah certainly knew and acted upon this. She had a very tight relationship with Sean, was solid with Caleb, and was very close to Brandon before the last tribal council. Now, this is slightly different from what was initially portrayed on TV, more or less through Emily's eyes, because she was certain that Sabiyah and Caleb were the very close ones. But Brandon told Gordon Holmes in his interview last week that Caleb and Sabiyah were not a pair. Sabiyah and Sean were the pair, and that Caleb sort of just grew into that.
Mm.
What we didn't know was that Sabiyah was also making inroads with Emily, even beyond the ones we saw in the episode, which somewhat explains some scenes previously, like when Sabiyah acknowledged to Emily that Sabiyah was like, "Yeah, I was reacting defensively in that first tribal council," which I was like, "No, you weren't." But now, in retrospect, that was her trying to smooth things over. And the key to all of this is that Sabiyah was cementing her place, and through Brandon's eyes last week, was essentially running things.
Yeah, I think she was in a really good position because she was able to find some type of connection with everyone, even though she and Emily were butting heads a bit. It always seemed to kind of come back around where it didn't escalate and blow
Mm-hmm.
up. It was kind of like, I'm going to say my piece, you can say your piece, and then we can just kind of move on. So I do appreciate that she was able to do that. And I really feel like she was really kind of like even keel about so many things that she was dealing with. But at the same time, maybe she got a little too comfortable with the fact that she was like in that position where she thought she was running things. And I know that I don't want to jump ahead or anything, but
Mm-hmm.
I do think that she had a really good read on the people that she was in her tribe with, and she was certainly trying to play a long-term game by staying on top of those
Right.
reads and playing information off of other people that she was on the tribe with. So I do think she was doing a great job in trying to find a good balance, but at the same time I think the more things kind of kept working for her, then I feel like maybe she was getting a little too like, well, look at me, I'm running things.
Yeah, and we did discuss that she was running things a bit last week, and you say things were working for her. I don't know that they. Well, I know that they weren't 100% because I had said last week it would have made sense for her to keep Brandon from a loyalty standpoint,
Yes.
and surmise that she was unable to get Emily voted out then because she didn't have a vote herself and was
Hmm.
arguing from a position of no power. But we both recognized we needed her side of the story. We just didn't expect it quite so soon. Um, and now she's given it, as she told Rob, when you don't have a vote, you can't really put your foot down because it's like, this is Sabiyah's opinion.
Right.
And she summed it up by saying, I had no power. So because of that, she lost a trusted supporter while Emily was still there. But that didn't stop her because, like we were just saying, she tried to bring Emily in. The problem is that she didn't know that, as she said in at least one interview, Caleb was thinking way ahead of me. And
Mm.
he'd already been working on Emily himself.
Yeah. Well, and when I say things were working for her, I think part of that rests on her like thought that I didn't have a vote and I was still fine.
Mm-hmm.
Where like she was in a position where even though she didn't have that power to vote, it wasn't negatively affecting her ability to
Right.
exist in the
Right.
group that she had formed. And so I do feel like that's where that comfort came from, where she was like, "Oh,
Yes.
well, I'm still okay. Even though I don't have a vote, I'm still okay." Which is probably part of the reason why she was willing to sacrifice her vote again, because she thought, well, I made it this far and I didn't have a vote and everything's fine. So, I do think that that's part of the idea that it was working for her, because if you don't have a vote, it does take away your ability to negotiate. But it didn't seem to be having that type of negative effect on her
Mm-hmm.
with the core group of people that she was with.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, last week also, Caleb talked about how a good player would bring Emily in rather than leaving her on the outs. And
Mm-hmm.
indeed, that's what he did. In a secret scene this week, we saw even more of that as he continued his tutoring of her and explained why she shouldn't say certain things in front of the whole group. Um, this is your inside voice. It's not quite what he said, but it was essentially. Um, and he was telling us this was one of the ways you can gain someone's trust. It
Mm-hmm.
turns out, as we mentioned, Sabiyah was trying also, but she was too late. And, we already mentioned how good a salesman Caleb is.
Yeah.
Now, we saw Caleb doing this. Sabiyah had almost no idea. And she tweeted after the episode, y'all just saw that Caleb, parentheses, great move, had been working with M behind my back the whole season. And then she added to that when she was talking to Mike Bloom, Caleb is so good. I tip my hat seriously to him because of the way he would paint it. He would be like, we can't make it too obvious she's going home. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. He's like, let me go talk to her at the end of the day. We're all human beings, right? Of course, I'm eating that up. And she did add to Dalton Ross that they noticed him spending more time with Emily. Quote, but we don't want to Boston rob them. We don't want to mob boss, like nobody leaves the camp.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to do that because that would mean we don't trust them. But me and Sean definitely should have acted more on those instead of sitting and kind of letting things happen to us. I feel like that was my biggest regret playing, is playing more passively, socially, and allowing things to happen more naturally instead of taking the initiative like Caleb did in creating that relationship. So
Yes, and
basically,
go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, as much as Sabiyah schemed and plotted, Caleb just outdid her in that regard.
Yes, and this really boils down to the ability to then manage information, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you've formed that relationship and you've created that bond, but you have everybody kind of in their place, then Caleb can manage all of the information that's being shared because he's the one saying, well, let me go talk to Emily
Mm-hmm.
Sabiyah. I'll smooth this over and make sure this is okay. And he's the one communicating with Emily, and he's the one who's communicating with Sabiyah. And so it really is he has all of the information.
Mm-hmm.
And so he is in the best position at that point because he can share with the other people whatever he decides. He doesn't have to share everything. And so I really do think that that was an incredible move for him to make because it really comes down to how do you manage that information?
Yes, yes. Now, the second rule says not to scheme and plot too much and to keep your scheming secret. Or at least that's the way I generally shorten it when I read it off here. There's another part of the title. And if you see it on the poster, it says, don't backstab until you absolutely need to. And here is where we hit a major issue because Sabiyah clearly backstabbed too soon. Since she was worried about Caleb at the end of the game when it was only day 6 and 7 when she was talking about this.
Right.
She said things like, I know I do not want to sit with Caleb at the end, but she needed to worry about right now, not
right
at the end.
Yeah, you need to get to the merge.
Yeah, especially when she had such an easy and obvious target in Emily. But she said in talking to Sean, I wonder if it's better for us to get an obvious threat out first. And Sean questioned if it was too early, and Sabiyah acknowledged it was early, but said that, if they did it now, they wouldn't have to rely on other people later. I understand that she was worried about Caleb making new friends and all that. And, many saw the type of guy he was, even in the pregame. But even so, worrying about him now was just way too soon. Once they lost the immunity challenge, Sabiyah said, it's got to be Caleb tonight. And all I could think was, no, it doesn't. It doesn't have to be Caleb tonight.
Yeah, but then I think you run into an interesting issue with the relationship that has been now formulated between Caleb and Emily because but for Sabiyah coming after Caleb, does he still hold loyalty to Sabiyah and Sean, or has he somehow now formulated this new relationship and now new loyalty with Emily? And is that somehow going to affect his ability to move forward with Sean and Sabiyah? So I'm just curious where everybody kind of ranked at that point in time, in Caleb's mind.
Yeah, and I mean, we probably won't know until Caleb goes, or may never know because it may be too far in the future to even ask about it at that point. But I think based on what we saw on TV and in the secret scenes, Caleb was describing it as giving himself additional flexibility with Emily. To me, that screams backup alliance.
Yeah, that's fair.
That he's not saying, hey, this is who I want to go with, especially since that would have caused it to be 2 against 2. What good would that have done him?
Yeah, that's fair too. Yeah.
So so you only do that if your own game life is at risk. And
Right.
so I don't think he would have made this move if he hadn't gotten the alert.
But I'm also curious because we know that the whole plan that was put in place was Sabiyah says to Caleb, "Well, I'm going to tell Emily it's you."
Right.
And then, Caleb is like, "Okay, and I'm going to tell her that it's you," or what, however
Right.
they determined that. So it's a very interesting, like, what is the telltale sign for Caleb that, like, that discussion was genuine that he had with Sabiyah versus Sabiyah actually going and telling Emily it really is Caleb. Like, that's what I want to know. I want to
Okay, well,
know how
I have
Caleb.
thoughts. They don't necessarily fall in this rule, which kind of
Okay.
is a hint. I do think, and I don't remember, I think it's in my notes somewhere, but I do think one thing was if Emily told him, which we didn't see on TV, but I presume Emily also said, and she showed me the candle idol and she told me about her lost vote. And as soon as Emily reveals that Sabiyah spilled all the secrets, then it's not just pointing at him to say, as a cover story, because there's no reason
Right.
to tell all the secrets if it's just a cover story.
Sure. And that's
So
fair.
I think that that's probably what happened.
Okay.
But I also think there's more than that. Now, getting back to the reasoning that Sabiyah had for going after Caleb, she said in her interviews, one main thing that we didn't know, it was never brought up, was that she and Sean were anticipating a swap after they lost the immunity challenge. And it's interesting because there hasn't been a swap yet in the new era. But as soon as we saw the preview that one was coming, I was like, oh, obviously this is a contingency because Lulu did so poorly. They're down to 3, and probably the planned challenges wouldn't work with only 3 people in a tribe.
Right.
And I'm sure we've discussed this here before, but while everything in the game is pre-planned, certain parts have to be flexible, kind of like on an if-then chart. Like if things are going normal, there probably would not have been a swap. But if a tribe loses 3 in a row, then they need to swap to even things out. And as fans, Sabiyah and Sean were thinking along the same lines. Sabiyah was like, the only times this has happened when they've gotten down to 3, they've swapped before.
Right.
The only thing I'll say is, in her shoes, even knowing that, I don't think I would have based my game moves on that same prediction because new era has been different.
Yes, it has been. And also, Sabiyah is, she's not an Emily, where, like, Emily is having to be, like, kind of taught by Caleb how to interact with other people. Sabiyah understands how she needs to interact with other people, and, like, it's just this idea that if there is a swap, I feel like Sabiyah would have likely been fine regardless of even Caleb, because if she's associated with Caleb, then that's better for her, right? Because Caleb is making these connections. Sabiyah is with Caleb. So all of that kind of, works itself.
Okay. So you're saying exactly what I was thinking. Because, she was worried about Caleb's relationship, specifically with the Reba people. He was a big fan of Austin even before going over there. And then she went over there and she said she spoke to all the Reba people individually. And so that's what caused her radar to go up, as she told Mike Bloom, about him being so social. But I'm thinking exactly the same thing you're thinking. Caleb told her that he was doing all those things. He didn't try to keep it a secret.
Right. Like, you're together.
Yeah. This tells me, much like I was just saying that Sabiyah would have, telling Emily about the idol and the lost vote, that indicates you're planning to work with her.
Right.
Him telling her about all the things he did with Reba is an indication he's planning to work with you. He's not going to tell you all this information and then use it to backstab you.
Right. And her biggest concern with Emily was what's going to happen at Emerge. Emily's going to run and start sharing or flipping, and it's not going, the loyalty was a big issue. Like with the Brandon Emily vote, it was, do we choose loyalty or someone who's good in challenges? And they went with someone who's good in challenges instead of loyalty. And so I think that it's really kind of a mixed message here, because if you want to prove that you are loyal, you're not proving you're loyal by getting rid of the person who is proving his loyalty to you. And so Emily, how is Emily going to feel about a continued relationship with Sabiyah, knowing that Sabiyah just took out Caleb, who she thought was like, super close with Caleb?
Yeah, I mean, but the other thing is, to Sabiyah, in Sabiyah's mind, he was not going to be loyal to her, or there was the risk. I won't say he was not, because I think she was just worrying about the wrong thing. Like at one point, she said in interviews, "Am I going to be, third to, Austin or people on Reba or whatever else?" And so, I mean, but again, yeah, I think she just misread the situation. These are things she should have latched onto to help her in the game, not said, "Oh, he's getting in good, therefore I need to get rid of him." So, with that in mind, do I still say that she backstabbed too soon? Yes. And some people may have seen her interview with Dalton, where she said, people have given comments about, "Oh, you're thinking about the end too quick." Well, if you don't have the end in mind the whole time, you're doing it wrong. And she's right. She's right that you should have the end goal in mind. That's literally part of the title of Appendix A. But you can't look so far ahead that you forget about what's going on right now. Yeah. Even with everything Sabiyah mentioned, with the relationships she thought Caleb might be making, it was still too early to target Caleb. She should have, like we just said, ensured she was super tight with Caleb, latched onto him. So any additional allies he brought in would be her new allies too.
Right. Yeah, he hadn't given her any indication that he was going to turn on her.
Right.
And that's what it really is a big component of it. There was no reason for her to feel any type of threat. The threat came from, he's going to do really well later in the game.
Yes. Now, another problem with this move, which you already got to before I could, is she had to trust Emily in the plan. And she had to, like we said, spill all her secrets, which means she told everything to Emily. And so that gave Emily a lot more power. Now, Sabiyah didn't know that Emily would turn on her because Caleb did such a good job in keeping his closeness to her a secret. So, in Sabiyah's eyes, Emily was someone who was expecting to be voted out, and she threw her a lifeline. In most cases, people who were in what she thought was Emily's position would have grabbed that lifeline and said, "Yay, someone wants to keep me. This is great." In this case, Caleb was a couple steps ahead. Not only had he thrown her a lifeline, he had pulled her all the way in.
Yep.
And so all this information just verified to Emily that Sabiyah never really trusted her and probably wouldn't going forward, like you said.
Yeah.
So.
Agreed.
All right. Well, we could go to the third rule, which tells players to be flexible. How do you think Sabiyah did here?
She was too flexible. She was overly flexible. It's one of those situations where I think the Caleb version of being flexible was a better play because, as you indicated, your interpretation, and I think it's probably correct, that Emily was the backup plan if he needed it, whereas Sabiyah was kind of like, that's it. She drew a line in the sand. She's like, that's it. I got it. This is I need to go this way instead of this way. Instead of really working through the options and the possibilities, it was like she made a decision and stuck with it. Even though, I mean, Sean, you've already mentioned, tried to go, well, do you think maybe this is a little too soon? No, not too soon. We have to do it. And so it was like she had a really good thing going, but then it was like it was like 0 to 60 in like 2 seconds, where all of a sudden now she's targeting the person who's supposed to be like closest to her. So I do think that, yes, there was some definite, she wanted to be flexible. She wanted to keep her options open. She was willing to work with Emily, even though she had already said Emily's not loyal and we're going to have issues with Emily when we get to emerge. And she had even been going back and forth between what's better with Brandon and Emily and loyalty and how do we play all of that. And so I think she really, really wanted to be flexible, but it was like too much, too soon, too fast as far as her being flexible.
Yeah. I mean, you pretty much summed it up. I mean, she showed flexibility, by, doing what we heard Caleb talking about, not just excluding a player like Emily, who was obviously on outs, but working on her a bit and eventually bringing her into the plan. It's just that, again, Caleb beat her to the punch.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we can go to the fourth rule, which tells players not to let their emotions control them. From everything we've seen and discussed, it seems to me that Sabiyah did well here. And just like you said, she was almost too flexible. I have to say she did almost too well here, in that it was a good thing that she was willing to work with Emily, give her a second or third chance, even after Emily had previously pissed her off. And it was a good thing that she was looking at the threat Caleb posed, even though she really liked him, that she could put that aside and say, wait a minute here. I think that there's an issue. The problem was that neither of those were the right decisions. Or in this case, for the reasons we've discussed and will continue to go into. She was right to separate strategy from emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, the strategy she chose wasn't the best one.
Well, and I think that she probably let the emotions kind of take over with the Caleb component of it, because she let that fear kind of build in her that, like, oh, well, he's going to do so well when we merge, and he's going to have all of these relationships. And so she probably worked herself up into a bit of a tizzy where she was thinking, well, where do I fall in that, and how am I going to combat that, and I don't want to be sitting with him in final three. And so you have this narrative that you've now created in your brain that isn't even necessarily going to happen if you don't get there. And so I think that could certainly be part of her emotions just kind of taking over, because she is creating this world that doesn't exist, and she's making it exist in her own mind, which is then convincing herself that it's going to happen. And so I think that, it spiraled a little bit.
Yeah. All right. Well, the fifth rule reminds players they need to pretend to be nice and play the social game. Now, we know Sabiyah got along very well with 4 of the 5 other Lulu members through the first 7 days of the game. Now, even though Sabiyah reacted in the moment to Emily, the blame fell squarely on Emily, I think, as far as everyone else was concerned. And while I also thought Sabiyah was in the right, she wisely apologized to Emily later, as we mentioned. Not because she did anything wrong, I don't think, but to lay the groundwork for, the possible mending of fences and the eventual move she decided to make. But, and I know this is sounding like a broken record. By the way, a record is something that goes around and you play music on. I mean, you said nobody knew what a tape was.
I know you didn't explain to them what a tape was.
I know. Anyway,
I just want to know if anyone, like the old school people out there that know how to, like, when your tape would get eaten by the machine and then you had to, like, put it back in, the tricks that you had to use. Yeah, those types of things.
The old pencil.
Oh, yeah, the pencil trick.
So where I was going before I distracted myself. No, it was
records.
I think Caleb was a step ahead of her again. First, because we didn't really see him react at all, other than a few words of agreement with Sabiyah. I mean, Emily was talking about both of them. Sabiyah was the one who really reacted to it. And I know I've heard that was a much longer discussion, so maybe Emily focused more on Sabiyah, and that's wrong, and that's why. But still, Caleb didn't really, he was just kind of nodding along.
Yeah.
But also because he did not just connect strategically with Emily, but socially. We saw him fist bumping her, even hugging her to let her know she was good before the previous tribal council. Then in the secret scene I mentioned, Emily again hugged him, put her head on his shoulder, talked about how, she was missing some of the social skills, but he's helping her. That kind of emotional connection, I think. Remember earlier I said, besides strategic, there was something else. This is what I'm talking about. I think it was that connection is what really made Emily run to him shortly before tribal council and let him know his game life was in danger. Yeah. And even watching her, you could tell she was emotional. She said, this isn't Emily trying to save her ass. This is Emily trying to save your ass. Again,
that's powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. Ending with another hug. You asked how she convinced him. I think it was a combination of the information she had and the emotion. He's got to know she wears her emotions more outwardly than most people.
Right.
If she is this concerned, something real is going on here.
Yeah. And I do think that Sabiyah's approach with Emily was problematic just in that when she finally decided, okay, I'm going to tell you all of my secrets, by telling her all of her secrets, she then also revealed to Emily that she had lied to her previously about not having a vote.
Right.
And Emily clearly had been counting and was keeping track of
Yes.
how many votes there were. And so I do think that in that moment, Emily's probably thinking, well, wait, if you were lying to me then, how can I necessarily believe you now?
Mm-hmm.
And now all of a sudden I'm significant and important to you. Like, why am I so late in your configuration? Like, why all of a sudden does Emily matter when Emily didn't matter before and you weren't completely truthful? And so there is a lot to be said about how that can affect someone, especially if you are someone like Emily who is struggling socially in this type of environment. Then she is going to read into that more, and it's probably going to have a greater effect on her. And this is why I think she will never turn her back on Caleb, because Caleb came to her almost immediately and scooped her up and said, hey, listen, we need to talk. And it came from a very genuine place. And so for someone like Emily, I think that that was very, very meaningful. Whereas the way Sabiyah presented it to Emily, it was more like, oh, hey, listen, we want to turn on this guy and now we need your vote.
Yeah.
Now let's talk.
Yeah, exactly.
And that can certainly happen in Survivor a lot, but you also have to think about how the person who you are speaking to is going to respond to that. And Emily could have been like, great, good for me. I'm sitting pretty because now they're not focusing on me. But Sabiyah didn't know that Caleb had already created that genuine bond with her.
Right. I do want to say, Sabiyah mentioned in some of her interviews, it wasn't just that scene that we saw. She had laid some groundwork ahead of time, but the spilling of the secrets all came, right out then, apparently.
Right.
So, yeah. All right. Well, we can move to the 6th rule, which warns against being too much of a threat. I think from an overall perspective, I didn't see Sabiyah being viewed as a threat, but she was a clear and present danger in a very specific way, which was that she wanted to vote out Caleb. We've discussed a lot about Emily's decision, and we have some more to talk about in Appendix A. But what we can say here is that Emily saw Sabiyah wanting to vote out Caleb as a threat to both of them. It would take out her only true ally and leave her vulnerable, again, in a way we'll discuss more in Appendix A.
Yes, and this is something that we've referenced before, that threat doesn't necessarily have to come from how good you are in challenges or how good you are socially. A threat can come from, this person mentioned my name, or this person mentioned my number two's name. Now they are a direct threat to me. And so I do think that this is something that was certainly a consideration for Caleb and Emily when all of the information was coming together. And if you are being targeted by someone, normally that target doesn't really go away. And so if Sabiyah is looking at Caleb now, it just means she's going to be looking at Caleb later.
Yes. All right. Well, the 7th rule covers idols and advantages in game mechanics. And, oh boy, we have a topic here. So first, I'd like to get something out of the way. Sabiyah tweeted shortly after the episode, Survivor rule number 1, play the damn idol. Now, of course, we're actually in rule 7. But I'll let it slide this time. It was an emotional moment for her. I'll let it go. But
she's violating another rule.
But she's right. She should have played the idol. If she had, we'd obviously be talking about why Caleb lost instead. But are we saying that with 2020 hindsight, or could she have seen it coming? From her point of view at the time, she once again referenced in interviews how they expected a swap. As she told Mike Bloom, if I swap and I'm alone, I could have been a target as soon as I switch. But that would be great to have an idol, some security. So having to think about all of that in the booth, fortunately for Austin and them, they found that at camp. They had time to sit there, not having tribal every night, and to think about it. So it was the perfect storm for the worst decision ever. Mix that with sleep deprivation, mix that from being bit, I can't even say it. Being, the way the quote says, bit, beat to bleep, by the challenges. I don't know about that bit. I wonder if that was an error in the transcription. I think it was just beat to bleep in the chat by the challenges. Anyway, she said, I mean, you're not thinking. So this is something we've talked about before. We obviously have the benefit of sitting at home on our couch here while talking about these decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still decisions that have to be made under whatever conditions you find yourself.
But there's a lot to be said with what she referenced, because I do think that there is a survivor fog brain that happens to you when you are sitting there and all of a sudden you have to make a decision quickly about something, and you are not firing on all cylinders like you do at home, and you're not able to process as quickly, and there is this sense of paranoia that is going on as well. And I think the paranoia has a huge effect on the decisions that you're making, because you are coming at it from a much different perspective. You're like, I don't want anybody to know that I have this. I don't want anybody to know about this. I have to think about what's going to happen if I go here. And I have to think about, so it's not, a straight line. There are all of these twists and turns. So there is a lot to be said about having to make a decision like that in the moment. But again, what we've talked about as well is you got to get there first. And if you aren't able to get there, then it's not going to matter whether or not this moment happened, because she didn't play the idol and she found herself being voted out. Now, she did the math. She said she thought that she had the numbers. She didn't think that she was being targeted. So really, from her perspective, it made sense to not play the idol because she thought she was fine. She worked through the numbers and said, you know what? No, this is fine. I don't need to play the idol, because her name had never been even something of a consideration that she had heard. So kudos to Caleb and Emily for keeping it under wraps and not letting Sabiyah know that this was the plan. But she was also putting all of her faith into Emily, which we've already talked about. And so it is a very interesting mix to find yourself in. Like, do I really want to put all my eggs in that basket, or do I want to have absolute security and just play it in case and then hope I find another one later?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Like you said, so you have the survivor fog brain, but that's all the more reason to prepare yourself for these decisions ahead of time. Now, do I think this was the worst decision ever? Like she was, no, not at all. Should she have played the idol? Yes, obviously. But even without retrospectively looking at it, because again, first of all, you mentioned the swap, and she was talking about that. But she's predicating her actions on something that may or may not happen.
Right.
It's the new era. We don't know that there will be a swap. So don't bet your life on it.
Right.
But then you also mentioned how she was in, she thought she was in a good spot. However, if there was any doubt, if she had to think about it at all, there was any doubt in her mind, even the smallest amount, she should have used it. We've talked about it before. It is far better to use an idol unnecessarily than it is to go home with it in your pocket.
Right.
You can try to find another idol, or you could just play the game as you had been.
Right.
But if you don't play your idol, like you said, that's it. You're done. There's no second chance.
Right. And that's the unfortunate part of being in a situation like this. And I think that there is a lot to be said about, her having to make this decision in that moment while she was sitting there, at tribal council. Whereas, Austin was able to look at these, the options and try to consider his kind of plan of attack, if you will. But again, she's working through the numbers as she believes them to be. So the numbers in her mind, well, it makes sense for her not to play it, and then she can have it later. And I do think that there is this idea of, there is a lot of safety that you can feel when oh, I've got this idol and I'm safe. And so even if there's a swap, I have an opportunity. And in her mind, she was fine. She thought that she was fine. She thought she had Sean. She thought she had Emily. And so those are the three that she's going to be moving forward with. And now I've got this idol. And so I'm in that much better of a position. But yeah, she just didn't realize that she was being outplayed.
Yeah, I also think there is something to how much work it took to get this idol. It took so much. And we first thought about it when Austin opened it. He was like, I had to go through all this, and it's good for one tribal council.
Right.
And so she went through all this and then she was just going to burn it right there. I mean, she already burned it, I guess, but figuratively burn it, whereas she literally burned it before. And I think that played into it, where it was so difficult to get. I don't want to use this if I don't need to.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to waste it.
Right. But again, if there's any doubt at all, I don't care how difficult it was to get that idol. Use it.
Yeah.
Just use it. Now this is where we come to the why Jeff Probst is wrong about blank segment that I had mentioned removed here, because of what he said about Sabiyah's decision to not play the idol. He told Dalton Ross, she decides to make a big time move and risk it, which really you have to, right? I mean, it's an idol. You've got to go for it. No, Jeff, you don't. He's always promoting big moves. And then when she makes what he classifies as one and gets knocked out of the game because of it, he still says she was right to do it, even as she is saying she was wrong to do it.
So he's saying she was right to not play the idol.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it was a big move. But as usual with Jeff, if you listen to him and make a big move, you're going to lose. So
how is it a big move to not play it?
Because she was saving it to use later.
It would be a big move to play it. Well, right, but also it could have been a big move for her to play it, because then she would have taken Caleb out like she wanted.
I think if just because this is the way Jeff thinks, if she had played it and it had succeeded,
it would have been a big move.
It would have been a big move.
Right.
And he would have been thrilled by that. Right. But because she didn't play it, that was the big move.
Well, and often this is one of those, it's like Monday morning quarterbacking, right? Where people are like, oh, you should have done this, you should have done that, right. Which I know we sound like we do that a lot, right? Where
we sound like, but that's why we tried to explain, no,
right.
we're trying not to, as much
right.
as
And so I do think that this is one of those situations where, it happens a lot in Survivor when somebody plays an idol and they don't have to play it. And then people are like, oh, you just burned your idol.
Right.
And you didn't need to do that. But when somebody does play their idol and it works well, and it does, has the effect that you were seeking, and then also people are like, oh, look at that, you did the right. So it is really, it's like, it's the end result that kind of decides people's response to it, right? So right. Sabiyah didn't play it, so people are like, well, she should have played her idol. And then Sabiyah does play it and didn't need to play it, well, then she shouldn't have played her idol. So it really is like results oriented thinking, right? Where we look at what the end result was, and the end result was, well, she went home, and so she should have played the idol, but there are reasons why she should have considered it a little bit more than just saying, no, I want to hold on to it because there's potential merge that is happening. So there are a lot of levels there. But yes, I do think if she had played it, then it still would have been a big move in his world.
Yes. Yeah. And, as far as the results oriented thing, that's why we go through this. And that's what, I feel that we do differently here is, we try to remove that sort of thinking, that sort of bias as much as possible.
Right.
Now, would it have been portrayed to us differently if she had played the idol and hadn't needed to for some reason? Yeah, it probably would have been. But then, whatever would have happened, we'd have heard about later somehow. But again, better to use it and not need it than to have the reverse happen. So again, what it comes down to is don't listen to Jeff for strategy. Okay, so we can move on to Appendix A, which is about the tribe keeping their end goals in mind when voting. And we talk about voting out the weak, then the strong, then the weak, then the strong. At this point in the game, players should still be voting out the weak. But as we mentioned last week, that could be weak for challenges, but probably better in relation to overall tribe unity or specific alliance strength. We know Sabiyah was aware of the importance of this appendix because she essentially referenced it in a quote we discussed back in the second rule. And her thoughts about a likely impending swap helps explain why she wouldn't worry about keeping Caleb as their strongest member, because obviously it's not as important if you're going to have completely different tribes. That was one thing that people were saying immediately. Oh, you lose 3 challenges in a row and you get rid of your strongest person? Well, because in her mind, they weren't going to be a tribe anymore.
Right.
But we also discussed how Caleb could have helped her if he made other alliances and she stayed close to him.
Well, and I think it's interesting that the swap became such a big component of her thinking, because clearly that had to have been a thought that she was aware of going into the game, that if they get down to 3, then there will be a swap. So this brings me back to the Brandon vote then. So why are you so inclined to vote Brandon out and not Emily at that point in time, if you are just thinking to yourself, well, if we get down to 3, we're going to have a swap anyway, so we could just keep Brandon around, and even if we lose again.
But she didn't have a vote, remember? So.
And that's fair.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there goes her negotiation.
I mean, she may have made that case, or she might not have, to Caleb, because she didn't want to alert Caleb to her knowing that this could happen.
Right. Okay, that's fair.
So, yeah. Now, this appendix, is, we talked about what, she was doing, but the appendix is mostly about what other players should have done. In this case, it really all comes down to one other player, Emily. If she voted the way Sabiyah wanted, Caleb would go. If she went the other way and told Caleb, Sabiyah would go. Since Emily felt an allegiance to Caleb, that was a problem for Sabiyah. And she specifically said, Emily specifically said in the secret scene I referenced earlier, he is looking out for my game. That's loyalty. That's trust.
Yeah. Yeah. This is why social capital is so important when you play Survivor. Yes.
I also have to think Emily did the math, because Emily always did the math. If there's one thing.
Yes, she did.
And she realized, okay, if Caleb's voted out, there's the allied duo of Sabiyah and Sean plus her. If they voted Sabiyah out, it would be the allied duo of herself and Caleb plus Sean. So even though Sabiyah and Sean were talking about the swap, like I said, I don't think they brought the whole tribe into that. And so I doubt that Emily was thinking that there would be a swap. Siding with Caleb not only would help make Emily feel better about helping the person who helped her, but more importantly, for the game, it would put her into a better position too.
Yeah, she was going to be benefiting from all of those things that we talked about that Sabiyah could have benefited from with her relationship with Caleb. Because if Caleb is forming bonds with other people and you're his duo, or you're part of that group that Caleb brings along to wherever he ends up, good for you. And so Emily is now going to be benefiting from that, because she has this relationship with Caleb and she is now his number 2.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, it is about time to wrap things up. So what are your final thoughts about Sabiyah?
I wish we could have seen more of her, honestly. Yes. Like, I really enjoyed her pregame. I liked the calmness that came with Sabiyah, and I liked that she seemed very kind of focused. She had an energy, but it was a very controlled energy. I really just loved the way that she approached life. She's very dedicated, a strong woman. I was very excited to see her play this game. And even though she ended up in kind of this weird situation where, well, one, she had a tribe that could not win to save themselves, but she also lost her vote. And so she had a lot of things that were happening that could have put her in a really terrible position right off the rip. But she managed to still kind of work through that and not let it negatively affect her, because she at least had created relationships with people in her alliance, or in her tribe, I should say, that created an alliance that put her in a good position. Unfortunately, though, I do think she just got too comfortable. She really thought that, I have these people are with me. And she saw herself in that like leadership type of role and thought that she was the one pulling the strings. But it's interesting, because what we see a lot in Survivor is it's sometimes the person in the back is actually pulling the strings more than the person in the front, but they're letting the person in the front think that they're pulling the strings, which is exactly what Caleb was doing. He was letting Sabiyah think, you got this. Yep, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing this. And in the meantime, he was going off to the side with Emily, creating this whole existence with her and this alliance with her, and really kind of almost building a wall between Emily and Sabiyah because he'd already committed himself to Emily, and then Sabiyah tries to get in there and it's too late. So she was unfortunately outplayed by someone who we heard a lot about in pregame and how much likability he had, and people were noticing him. And I think Brandon even called him his winner pick. Like, if you're going to pick a winner, that's the guy right there. So we are seeing that formulate with Caleb, and that is not an energy that I think Sabiyah brought into her pregame. And so I think Sabiyah had to kind of prove herself, but she's up against someone like Caleb who just, it kind of has this natural energy about him, and he can kind of just grab people and bring them in. So I think Sabiyah's biggest issue really was the tribe she ended up on. I mean, I think it really just kind of boils down to it. Like, she's someone who I think is really kind of made for this game, but she was put with a group of people that just ended up negatively affecting her ability to play the game to the best of her ability. So unfortunately, we aren't going to see any more of her, but she was, I thought, a great character, an incredible survivor person overall. And I'm sad to see her go so soon.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Sabiyah played a very good game in difficult circumstances, but sometimes good players can get a little ahead of themselves. And they can also fall a step behind someone else. Now, that seems contradictory, but that's where Sabiyah found herself in relation to Caleb. She was already thinking ahead about getting rid of him, but he was ahead of her in terms of having options and flexibility to keep himself around, even though he didn't know he needed to protect himself to that level yet. Sabiyah knew she couldn't just toss Emily aside and needed to form some sort of relationship with her. But Caleb got there first, and although her social skills were good, his appeared to be almost magical. With this one move, he accomplished several things. He put himself into a good spot within Lulu, such that he believed he was tight with everyone. He expected to vote out Emily, I think, but if they hadn't lost a third immunity challenge, he would have had her plus the other two going into the merge. More than that, and probably somewhat unknowingly, he set himself up with an early warning system, because when Sabiyah tried to vote him out, Emily repaid him by saving his game life. I don't think Caleb expected Sabiyah and Sean to turn on him. In his mind, they were solid. That's why he was so open about all the connections he was looking at making with other people. But Sabiyah saw that as a future threat rather than something that could help her. She was right that at some point they would have to turn on Caleb, but her timing was just too soon. Just as she saw how good Caleb could be, others certainly would as well. I mean, we saw some of that just in the pregame. She thought it would be easier to vote him out now when they had control rather than later when they might have to rely on others. But the ironic thing is, she was relying on one specific other person now and didn't realize that her worry about the future was already here. Emily didn't see Caleb as a master salesperson who was going to control the game. She just saw him as the guy who helped her out when she needed it most. And Sabiyah didn't know that. All of her worries about him in the future had already come to pass in their small tribe, and her expectations were reversed, such that she should have waited until there were more people to work with. Caleb had all the options, and by being a step ahead, he got the warning from Emily, and he also got the benefit of Sabiyah not using her idol to save herself because she didn't think she needed to. Sometimes even good players just get out-schemed. Sometimes good players out-scheme themselves by thinking ahead too far, whether it's by worrying about a player being an endgame threat too soon or holding on to an idol for a future that never comes. In this case, it was all of these. And that is why Sabiyah lost.
That was good. A future that never comes. I like that.
All right. Well, Sabiyah didn't like it, that's for sure.
I know.
Yeah.
It would have been great to see more of her for sure.
Yes. All right. Well, before we get to our predictions, let me remind everyone to go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed. You can get all sorts of things there. You can subscribe. You can look at the Survivor 44 rules. You can get the poster. You can get the poster on a t-shirt. You can get the checklist on a t-shirt. All so these things options at robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed. Now, but one thing you can't find there is us on social media. You have to go elsewhere for
that's
that.
right. So yes, if you would like to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Jessica Lewis 89. If you would like to follow David Bloomberg on Twitter, he is at David Bloomberg. Now, but listen, we need to spend a little bit more time on this because David Bloomberg is he's like a social media guru. Are you like an influencer yet, David? Would you equate yourself to that? Okay, so we have influencer David Bloomberg here, who has so many media outlets that he has a whole page dedicated to himself. So you should definitely check him out at his link tree, which has all of his social media outlets. So David, take it away.
Yes, you could go to find that at Linktree/David Bloomberg, and there's a dot before the EE in Linktree. Or if you, for some reason, don't want to go through the Linktree, you could find me on the most text-based social media like Twitter and Blue Sky at David Bloomberg, and on the video platforms TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram as at David Bloomberg TV. And because Threads is connected to Instagram, I'm at David Bloomberg TV there too. I've been posting 3 or 4 videos per day on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. There are thoughts on what we're seeing on Survivor or Big Brother live feeds, even a few from other shows like the Traders Canada. So that's where you can find me on social media. And also, before we get to our predictions, I want to mention, I'm still doing double duty, Why Blank Lost podcasting here. Soon after this podcast is released, my Why Blank Lost for Big Brother 25 week 10 will be out with Ovi Kabir as my co-host there. And on top of that, I'm also on the Tradar podcast doing Traders Canada recaps. And so we just, early in the week, we put out episode 2 for that. And that's the Tradar, spelled Traidar. So like Trader, Radar, combine them together. And so, yeah, doing all those things as well.
Truly impressive.
Well, thank you. Probably more impressive than our predictions will be this week because, yeah, I mean, the preview didn't give us very much other than, hey, there's a swap.
Yeah.
I presume they'll be even at 5 each. As we're recording this, we have zero idea who's on what tribe. So making a prediction is even more of a toss-up than usual. With that said, going solely by the edit, 2 of the people I'm worried about are Sifu and Jay.
Yes, that was exactly where I was going as well.
Okay.
No, wait, you said Jake?
Jay,
yes.
they wouldn't even
Jay
need...
Maya. Okay.
Yes.
Yep, I agree.
They wouldn't even need to be alone on a swap tribe because one of their own current tribe mates could turn on them. But the same is true if Bruce is on the same tribe with Katurah.
We need to spend 2 seconds here, okay?
Okay.
Because and again, this is, I know, my finger. So it's interesting that we have seen so many references to Bruce being annoying and these things that that Kendra, Katurah is there's so many K's on that. I have to keep them all straight. So, but did you notice, like, during one of the challenges when Bruce was doing something, the people who were not in the challenge even referenced Bruce being annoying?
I did not notice that.
It was like a very quick little, so the 2 people who sat out on each of the tribes, and all of a sudden there was some comment like, God, Bruce really is so annoying. And I was like, what? Why is that even being put in there?
Well,
so
this may lead me to, because I wonder, why have we been seeing so much of this Bruce Katurah rivalry?
We saw the thing with Emily at the very beginning where she was like, Bruce. I mean, and then
I think we had to see that. It just came out.
Well, we had to see it, but it's been like a constant thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So if they end up on a new tribe as the only 2 from their original tribe, I could easily see Katurah using the opportunity to swing over and finally get rid of him with people who are not like totally enthralled by him already. Yeah. So unfortunately, that's going to be my prediction.
Ooh, you're going with Bruce.
I am.
You know what? I feel like even though that's really interesting because of that other little extra added component I just thought of, I'm going to stick with Sifu. he was my pick last week. And I'm going to stick with him just because and again, this is solely an edit thing where he and J Maya have been like completely kind of left out of everything as far as Reba is concerned. They're just kind of there, and we're not hearing much about them. We don't really know what's going on, and I just feel like if the swap goes in a way that they are outnumbered, I don't see Reba necessarily having their back. I think that if someone's got to go, it might be a Sifu. So that's my thought.
And the main reason I didn't go with Sifu is because if there's a swap, then they know that the game is going to go on for a little while before the merge. So I would say they'd look at Sifu and be like, we just lost a challenge. Do we want to get rid of our strongest person?
And I don't disagree, but Bruce is also fine in the challenges as well.
Yeah, but he's not Sifu, you know?
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like I don't know. I mean, who knows? We'll see what happens, right? I mean, we're tossing it in the air. Right. We're going to see where it lands. I mean, whatever. We're like, this is not the greatest week for predictions. No. It's never great for Jessica when it comes to predictions. So whatever. I mean, it is what it is at this point.
Yeah. All right. Well, as we wrap up, I want to encourage people to check out the RHAP patron program at robhasawebsite.com/patron. Especially with Big Brother and Survivor going on at the same time, there's all these different patron only podcasts. There's a Survivor Q&A. There's a Big Brother Q&A. Those are both call-in shows. There's the RHAP. There's all sorts of other just different.
Stop. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll stop. Jessica was talking to her dog, in case there was anybody wondering who didn't see. And so, yeah, you could get all of those different things, plus the Facebook groups and the Discord. Great community of people. So support shows like ours and everything on the network by becoming a patron at robhasawebsite.com/patron. Also, make sure you're subscribed to all of the reality TV RHAP podcasts by going to robhasawebsite.com/RHAP feed. Excuse me. And selecting your podcast service of choice. You'll not only find content like us, the B&B, Stockwatch, Survivor International, but obviously podcasts on a number of other shows like Big Brother and, wrestling shows, crime shows, whatever. I think they cover, well, this is probably on the main feed, the House of Villains. So just all sorts of stuff is going on. So, yeah, make sure, again, you subscribe.
You definitely should. And we would like to thank everyone with the RHAP team. Scott St. Pierre, thank you for all the editing that you do, not only on the Why Blank Lost podcast, but all of those podcasts that David Bloomberg was just referencing. Everyone is so dedicated to the cause here with Rob and the community that he's created. So thank you so much for all of the work that you do, making this content available and possible for all of us. So everyone on the team with RHAP is just incredibly dedicated. So thank you for that. Thank you to Will from America for the theme song that you created for the Why Blank Lost podcast. And David, thank you so much for another week and tolerating me in the way in which you do. So I really do appreciate it. People don't understand what you have to go through sometimes with me, but I am very thankful that you are so understanding of the many hats that Jessica must wear. So thank you very much. And thank you to the listeners for listening. We do appreciate it so very much. It's
and the watchers
so
for
nice
watching.
to.
Yes,
and the watchers for watching. So thank you for everyone out there who is supporting us and supporting RHAP and supporting all of the content that is put out there. So we appreciate it. Thanks.
Yes, and thank you, Jessica, for another great episode. We will be back next week. You'll be able to see me in hours to a day after this comes out. So we'll see. And then you can find me all over the place. You can find Jessica here and on Twitter. And so now
I'm on Instagram occasionally.
Oh, okay. I'm going to take my hammer and go beat on some rocks for you to get revenge.
Thank you. Make sure they're all black rocks, okay?
Okay,
just to be very specific.
Yes, because if you had pulled the white rock, you'd have been fine. You wouldn't have been knocked out of the game. But no, you had to get the single rock there.
I know.
So
I did.
so
Let's remind me how terrible of a choice that was.
yeah. Yeah, I don't.
Choices.
Yeah, I'll have to find. Well, I'll have to see what color rocks I have. I don't know. I'll just beat on any rocks out there and see if any of them have idols in them. So,
oh, listen, if you find an idol in some random rock at your house, there's some some stuff going on. Let's just say, maybe there are aliens out there.
That's
okay.
right. All right, or Jeff. Jeff's been visiting my house secretly. So,
how fun would that be?
Yeah. Yeah.
He's like, you want to play, David Bloomberg? I will put this in your house. My dog came back. So
yes.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Bye.
Bye.